The Wild West conjures images of perfect shots, blazing duels, and revolvers that never fail. But history tells a very different story. Frontier revolvers were tools of survival, yes, but crude ones, prone to error, and often misunderstood. The myths that surround them have lasted more than a century, shaping how we imagine the era. In this video, we'll bust 11 of the biggest myths about these so-called deadly weapons, from fanning the hammer to the truth about quick draws, and reveal the gritty reality that Hollywood left behind. Number 11. All Wild West revolvers were deadly accurate. Let's start by destroying the foundation of every Western movie you've ever seen. That image of a gunslinger picking off tin cans from 50 yards away with perfect precision? Pure Hollywood fantasy. The harsh reality is that 19th century revolvers were crude instruments compared to modern firearms. Most featured basic iron sights, nothing more than a simple blade at the front and a rough notch carved into the frame at the back. These primitive aiming systems made precise shooting incredibly challenging, especially under the stress of actual combat. The ammunition itself was wildly inconsistent. Black powder charges varied significantly from cartridge to cartridge, causing bullets to fly in unpredictable patterns. Add to this the fact that black powder was highly corrosive and quickly fouled the barrel with each shot.
Just a bit sooner than y'all was expecting.
And you had weapons that became less accurate with every trigger pull. Professional trick shooters like Annie Oakley could perform miraculous feats of marksmanship, but they used specially modified weapons, carefully prepared ammunition, and had unlimited time to aim under controlled conditions. The average cowboy or lawman carried a working tool, not a precision instrument. Historical records reveal that most gunfights occurred at distances of 15 feet or less. At these close ranges, hitting a man-sized target was challenging enough. The idea of shooting coins out of the air or splitting playing cards was pure fantasy. Created by dime novelists who had never held a real revolver. The psychological impact of this myth has been enormous. We've been conditioned to believe that frontier violence was clean and precise, when in reality, it was chaotic and often ineffective. Many documented shootouts involved multiple participants, firing numerous rounds with surprisingly few casualties, simply because hitting your target with a period revolver required considerable luck, along with skill. This mythology has obscured the truth about frontier combat. It was desperate, close range, and brutal. The men who survived weren't necessarily the best shots. They were the ones who got closest and fired first. But if accuracy was such a problem, surely the solution was to carry more firepower. That brings us to another persistent myth about how gunfighters armed themselves. Number 10. Most gunfighters carried 2 revolvers. Hollywood loves the image of the two-gun gunslinger, revolvers blazing from both hands in a display of ultimate firepower. This iconic image screams professional killer, suggesting a warrior so skilled he needs twice the weapons of an ordinary man. The reality: carrying 2 revolvers was extremely uncommon among actual frontier fighters. The primary reason was brutally practical. Weight. A fully loaded Colt Peacemaker weighs nearly 3 pounds. Strapping 6 pounds of steel to your hips, plus the additional weight of gun belts, holsters, and extra ammunition, was not just uncomfortable. It was a serious tactical disadvantage. Most people simply couldn't shoot accurately with their non-dominant hand. The idea of firing both weapons simultaneously with any degree of precision exists only in movie fantasies. The human brain isn't wired to coordinate 2 separate aiming systems simultaneously while under the extreme stress of Mortal Kombat. When gunfighters did carry backup weapons, they typically opted for what modern experts call the New York reload, a smaller concealed second gun that could be drawn when the primary weapon ran dry. This was far more practical than trying to manage two full-sized revolvers. Some historical figures did carry matched pairs, but usually for specific tactical reasons. Wild Bill Hickok's famous ivory-handled Navy Colts were as much about psychological warfare as firepower. The sight of matched weapons sent a clear message about the owner's deadly intentions and financial resources. The two-gun myth persists because it represents ultimate preparedness and looks incredibly dramatic on screen. It's become such visual shorthand for dangerous gunfighter that audiences automatically associate it with historical fact. The truth reveals a world of practical limitations and economic constraints. Most cowboys, lawmen, and even outlaws made do with a single, reliable revolver. They focused on mastering one weapon rather than juggling multiple firearms. Understanding that in a real fight, being weighed down by unnecessary equipment could mean the difference between life and death. Speaking of practical limitations, there's another myth that makes frontier gunfighting seem far easier than it actually was. If you're as fascinated by these hidden stories of the Wild West as we are, go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps us know what kind of content you love. And if this is your first time here, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the myths, legends, and weapons that shaped the frontier. Number 9. Revolvers never jammed or misfired. In every classic Western, revolvers function with mechanical perfection. The hero draws, fires 6 shots in rapid succession, and every cartridge performs flawlessly. Mechanical failures simply don't exist in Hollywood's version of the Wild West. This cinematic perfection completely ignores the mechanical reality of 19th century firearms technology. Period revolvers were hand-assembled, using relatively primitive manufacturing techniques. Tolerances were loose, metallurgy was inconsistent, and quality control was minimal compared to modern standards. Misfires were incredibly common. The percussion cap system used in many Civil War-era revolvers was particularly unreliable. Moisture could render caps useless, and the black powder charges were prone to separation or contamination. Even with the more advanced cartridge revolvers of the 1870s, rimfire ammunition was notoriously unreliable, with failure rates sometimes exceeding 20%. Mechanical jams occurred regularly. The complex timing mechanisms that rotated cylinders and cocked hammers were delicate assemblies that could be thrown off by dirt, corrosion, or simple wear. A single grain of sand in the wrong place could completely disable a revolver. The infamous click of a misfire was a sound every frontiersman dreaded. Historical accounts are filled with stories of gunfights ending not with the fastest draw, but with whose weapon actually fired when the trigger was pulled. Professional gunfighters developed elaborate maintenance routines to keep their weapons functional. They carried multiple firearms specifically because they understood the unreliability of period technology. Smart fighters also carried backup percussion caps, spare cylinders, and cleaning equipment. The myth of perfect reliability has created unrealistic expectations about historical firearms. It makes us forget that these weapons were mechanical devices subject to all the limitations of 19th century engineering. This reality added another layer of tension to every armed confrontation. A gunfighter's survival depended not just on speed and accuracy, but on whether his weapon would actually function when his life depended on it. But even when revolvers did fire properly, there's another myth about their stopping power that needs serious correction. Number 8. All Wild West revolvers were instantly lethal. Hollywood has convinced us that a single shot from any Wild West revolver would instantly drop a man like a stone. Every bullet seems to possess magical stopping power, ending fights with clinical efficiency. The truth about revolver ballistics paints a very different picture. Many popular frontier calibers were surprisingly weak by modern standards. The .36 caliber rounds used in Navy Colts, while better than nothing, often failed to incapacitate determined opponents immediately. Even the famous .45 Colt cartridge, while certainly powerful, wasn't the devastating man-stopper Hollywood portrays. Period ammunition used soft lead bullets traveling at relatively low velocities. While these created serious wounds, they often lacked the hydrostatic shock necessary for instant incapacitation. Historical accounts are filled with stories of men absorbing multiple revolver hits and continuing to fight. During the Lincoln County War, participants regularly survived wounds that should have been immediately fatal. According to movie logic, the human body's ability to function despite serious trauma was a harsh reality frontier fighters understood well. Shot placement was absolutely critical. A hit to the central nervous system or major blood vessels could end a fight quickly, but peripheral wounds often had little immediate effect. This is why professional gunfighters aimed for the largest available target, the torso, rather than attempting Hollywood-style precision shots. The myth of instant lethality has obscured the brutal reality of period gunfights. Many encounters devolved into extended exchanges where multiple participants absorbed serious wounds before anyone went down. Victory often went to the man with the strongest will to continue fighting, not necessarily the one with the best weapon. This reality explains why experienced fighters preferred shotguns for serious work. The multiple projectiles of a shotgun blast offered a much higher probability of immediate incapacitation than any single revolver bullet. Understanding the true limitations of revolver stopping power reveals why frontier violence was so often prolonged and desperate. Nothing like the clean, quick deaths portrayed in popular fiction. This leads us to another dangerous myth about how these weapons were actually used in combat. Number 7. Fanning the hammer was an effective fighting technique. You've seen it countless times. The hero, surrounded by enemies, rapidly slapping the hammer of his single-action revolver to unleash a devastating barrage of lead. This technique, called fanning, supposedly transformed a six-shooter into a machine gun. The reality of fanning couldn't be more different from its Hollywood portrayal. This technique was wildly inaccurate, beyond point-blank range. When fanning a revolver, the shooter completely abandons any attempt at aiming, simply pointing the weapon in the general direction of the target and hoping for the best. More importantly, fanning was incredibly destructive to the firearm itself. The internal mechanisms of period revolvers, specifically the cylinder stop and the hand that rotated the cylinder, were never designed to withstand the violent, repeated impacts of rapid hammer manipulation. Fanning would quickly wear down these delicate components, causing the cylinder to go out of timing. An out-of-time revolver was extremely dangerous to the shooter. When the cylinder wasn't properly aligned with the barrel, bullets could strike the frame upon firing, potentially causing catastrophic failure and serious injury to the person holding the weapon. Fanning was used by trick shooters in Wild West, shows like Buffalo Bills, but they employed specially modified weapons and blank ammunition for entertainment purposes. No serious gunfighter would ever rely on such a technique in an actual life-or-death situation. The technique's popularity in fiction stems from its visual drama. It creates the illusion of overwhelming firepower and suggests a level of weapons mastery that seems almost supernatural. Directors love it because it generates excitement and allows heroes to engage multiple opponents simultaneously. Professional gunfighters understood that accuracy and conservation of ammunition were far more important than rate of fire. They preferred controlled, aimed shots that would reliably stop opponents, rather than spraying bullets wildly and hoping something would connect. The fanning myth has created seriously unrealistic expectations about revolver capabilities, and has contributed to dangerous misunderstandings about proper firearms handling. But perhaps no myth about Wild West revolvers is more persistent than the legend of the lightning-fast quick draw. Number 6. Quick draw. Duels were common and decisive. The image is burned into popular culture. Two gunfighters facing each other on a dusty street, hands hovering over their weapons, waiting for the clock to strike noon. In a blur of motion, leather is cleared, shots ring out, and only one man walks away. This iconic scene represents everything we think we know about Wild West gunfighting, but it's almost entirely fictional. The formal quick-draw duel was exceedingly rare in the actual American frontier. Most gunfights were chaotic, close-range affairs that bore no resemblance to the structured showdowns of Hollywood legend. The famous gunfight at the OK Corral, often cited as the quintessential Western shootout, was nothing like a formal duel. It was a 30-second firefight between 9 men at close range, with participants blazing away at each other from just a few feet apart. There was no pacing off, no formal challenge, just sudden, explosive violence. Historical records show that most men killed in frontier gunfights were shot in the back or from ambush. Survival in the Wild West wasn't about being the fastest gun. It was about being the most ruthless and catching your opponent off guard. The quick-draw duel became popular in dime novels of the late 19th century because it transformed chaotic violence into a structured, almost gentlemanly contest. It suggested a code of honor in a lawless land and provided dramatic tension that sold books and later movie tickets. Real gunfighters understood that speed meant nothing if you couldn't hit your target. They practiced smooth, deliberate draws that prioritized accuracy over theatrical flourishes. Many carried their weapons in cross-draw holsters that were slower, but allowed for more controlled presentation. The myth has created a fundamental misunderstanding of frontier justice. It wasn't a noble contest between equals. It was a grim struggle for survival, where the rules were few and mercy was rare. This romanticized version of gunfighting has overshadowed the brutal reality of frontier violence and contributed to unrealistic expectations about historical combat. Speaking of unrealistic expectations, there's another myth that makes period ammunition seem far more advanced than it actually was. Number 5. Wild West revolvers had unlimited ammunition capacity. In classic Western films, heroes seem to possess revolvers with bottomless cylinders. They fire shot after shot without ever needing to reload, laying down sustained fire that would be impossible with actual 6-shot weapons. This is purely a product of lazy filmmaking and the demands of pacing. Stopping thrilling action sequences for realistic reloading breaks would kill the momentum directors work so hard to build. It's easier to simply ignore the mechanical limitations of period firearms in favor of continuous excitement. The reality of ammunition capacity was a constant source of anxiety for frontier fighters. Most revolvers held 6 cartridges, but smart shooters often carried them with the hammer, resting on an empty chamber for safety. Giving them only 5 shots before reloading became necessary. Reloading a single-action revolver was a slow, deliberate process that left the shooter completely vulnerable. The procedure required bringing the hammer to half-cock, opening the loading gate, using the ejector rod to push out each spent casing individually, then inserting fresh cartridges one by one. This vulnerability explains why experienced gunfighters preferred to end confrontations quickly rather than engage in prolonged firefights. Every shot had to count, because reloading under fire was virtually impossible. Ammunition itself was expensive and often difficult to obtain in remote areas. Cowboys didn't waste cartridges on casual target practice. Every round fired had a specific purpose, whether for hunting, protection, or actual combat. The myth of unlimited ammunition has completely removed one of the most crucial elements of tension from our understanding of period gunfights. The ticking clock of a dwindling ammunition supply was a constant tactical consideration that influenced every aspect of frontier combat. Smart fighters developed elaborate strategies around ammunition management, including carrying multiple weapons and positioning themselves near sources of resupply before engaging in any serious confrontation. This brings us to a myth about what many consider the most famous revolver of the entire frontier period. Number 4. The Colt Peacemaker was the only revolver that mattered. When most people think of Wild West revolvers, one weapon dominates their imagination: the Colt single-action army, universally known as the Peacemaker. Marketing campaigns have convinced generations that this was the gun that won the West. While the Peacemaker was undoubtedly an excellent and influential firearm, crediting it with winning the West is a massive overstatement that ignores the complex ecosystem of weapons that actually shaped the frontier. The Peacemaker wasn't even widely available until the mid-1870s, meaning it missed much of the classic Wild West era. For years after the Civil War, the frontier was flooded with surplus percussion revolvers that were far cheaper and more readily available than Colt's latest offering. Smith & Wesson revolvers were serious competitors that offered significant advantages in many situations. Their top break designs allowed much faster reloading, a crucial tactical advantage. Famous figures like Jesse James and Wyatt Earp were known to carry Smith & Wesson revolvers rather than Colts. Remington revolvers, with their solid frame construction, were often more durable and reliable than Colt products. Many professional fighters preferred them for heavy-duty use because they could handle more powerful ammunition loads without mechanical failure. The myth persists due to brilliant marketing and the gun's genuinely solid design. Colt created a compelling narrative around their product and had the marketing muscle to make it stick in popular memory. Hollywood reinforced this image by making the Peacemaker the default hero weapon in countless films. Economic reality painted a different picture. Most frontier inhabitants used whatever weapons they could afford and maintain. A working cowboy was more likely to carry a worn surplus revolver than an expensive new Colt. The truth reveals a diverse marketplace where different weapons served different needs. Professional gamblers preferred small, concealable weapons. Lawmen wanted reliability above all else. Hunters needed power and accuracy. This diversity of weapons reflects the complexity of frontier society itself, something the single-gun mythology completely overlooks. But even the famous Peacemaker couldn't compete with one particular type of weapon for sheer stopping power. Number 3. Revolvers were more powerful than rifles. Hollywood consistently portrays revolvers as the ultimate frontier weapons, capable of matching or exceeding the performance of long guns. Heroes routinely engage enemies at rifle ranges with nothing but their trusty six-shooters. The ballistic reality was completely opposite. Revolvers were severely limited in both range and power compared to the rifles of the same era. The short barrels of handguns couldn't develop sufficient velocity to make their projectiles effective beyond close range. A typical .45 Colt revolver cartridge generated around 400 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle. By comparison, a .45-70 rifle cartridge produced over 1,500 foot-pounds, nearly 4 times the power. At extended ranges, this difference became even more pronounced. Rifle bullets retained their energy much better over distance due to their higher velocities and better ballistic coefficients. A revolver bullet that might be marginally effective at 25 yards became essentially harmless at 100 yards, while rifle bullets remained lethal at distances measured in hundreds of yards. Professional hunters and military forces understood these limitations perfectly. They used rifles for serious work and carried revolvers primarily as backup weapons or for close-range personal protection. The effective range of most period revolvers was limited to about 50 yards under ideal conditions. Beyond that distance, hitting a man-sized target was largely a matter of luck rather than skill. This explains why smart gunfighters tried to close distance before engaging enemies armed with rifles. Getting within revolver range was often a matter of survival, not preference. The myth has created unrealistic expectations about handgun performance that persist today. It makes people forget that revolvers were specialized tools with specific limitations, not universal weapons suitable for every situation. Understanding these ballistic realities helps explain many tactical decisions made by historical figures who had to stake their lives lives on their weapon choices. This brings us to a myth about one of the most unusual revolvers ever created for the frontier. Pretty wild, right? Who would have thought the truth behind this so-called legendary weapon was so different from the Hollywood version? I'd love to hear what you think. Do you buy the history or do you still prefer the myth? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and who knows, we might feature your insight in an upcoming video. And if you haven't already, subscribe and join our growing community of Wild West enthusiasts. Number 2. Combination weapons, like the LeMat, were common. The LeMat revolver represents one of the most fascinating weapons of the Civil War era. A 9-shot revolver with a central 20-gauge shotgun barrel. Hollywood has portrayed such combination weapons as relatively common, suggesting that frontier ingenuity regularly produced these mechanical marvels. Dr. Jean-Alexandre Lema's creation was indeed a masterpiece of 19th century firearms engineering. The ability to switch between revolver and shotgun modes with a simple hammer adjustment gave users unprecedented versatility. Confederate officers made it famous during the Civil War, and it found its way into civilian hands afterward. However, the LeMat and similar combination weapons were extremely rare and expensive. They represented the cutting edge of firearms technology, priced well beyond the reach of ordinary cowboys or even most lawmen. Only wealthy individuals or high-ranking military officers could afford such sophisticated weapons. The complex mechanism required expert maintenance and was prone to fouling and mechanical failure. The intricate timing system that allowed switching between firing modes was delicate and could be disrupted by the rough conditions of frontier life. Manufacturing these weapons required skilled craftsmen and expensive materials. Each LeMat was essentially hand-built, making production slow and costly. The company never achieved the economies of scale necessary to make combination weapons affordable for mass consumption. Most combination weapons were produced in limited quantities as curiosities or specialty items, rather than practical fighting tools. While mechanically impressive, they often proved less reliable than simpler, more conventional designs. The myth of common combination weapons reflects our fascination with mechanical complexity and innovation. We want to believe that frontier inventors regularly created these amazing hybrid devices, but the economic and technical realities of the 19th century made them rare exceptions rather than common tools. The truth is that most frontier fighters preferred simple, reliable weapons. They could maintain and repair themselves rather than complex mechanisms that might fail at crucial moments. But of all the myths surrounding Wild West revolvers, perhaps none is more persistent than the legend of the ultimate gunfighter's weapon. Number 1. There was one deadliest revolver that ruled the West. We've saved the biggest myth for last. The idea that there was one supreme revolver that stood above all others as the ultimate frontier weapon. Popular culture suggests that serious gunfighters all converged on a single best choice. The reality reveals a complex marketplace where different weapons served different needs and preferences. What made a revolver deadly depended entirely on the user's specific requirements, financial situation, and personal preferences. Professional gunfighters often chose weapons based on reliability rather than raw power. A revolver that fired every time was infinitely more valuable than a more powerful weapon that might fail at a crucial moment. This led many to prefer simple, robust designs over more sophisticated alternatives. Concealment requirements drove many weapon choices. Gamblers and undercover lawmen needed weapons they could hide effectively, leading them to favor smaller calibers and shorter barrels. Raw stopping power was less important than discretion. Economic factors played a huge role in weapon selection. Most frontier inhabitants used whatever they could afford, maintain, and find ammunition for. The best weapon was often simply the one you could actually obtain and keep running. Regional preferences varied significantly based on local conditions and threats. Areas with dangerous game required different weapons than regions where human opponents were the primary concern. Climate, terrain, and local ammunition availability all influenced choices. The concept of a single deadliest revolver is a marketing creation that ignores the diversity of the frontier experience. Different weapons excelled in different situations, and smart fighters often carried multiple weapons to cover various scenarios. Professional killers understood that the deadliest weapon was the one you could use most effectively, not necessarily the one with the best specifications on paper. Training, maintenance, and tactical skill mattered far more than mechanical superiority. Thanks for riding with us through the brutal truths and myths of the Wild West's most feared revolvers. If you enjoyed this adventure, give us a thumbs up and share it with fellow history buffs. It helps us reach even more curious minds. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell, because our next deep dive into the untold stories of the frontier is one you definitely won't want to miss.